You know that rule we all learned in school? The one that says absolutely all life on Earth begins with the sun? It's basically biology 101, right? Plants soak up the sunlight, animals eat the plants, and boom, the whole global food chain gets moving. But what if that golden rule is just completely wrong? Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into a massive discovery that totally shatters everything we thought we knew about survival. And it answers a wild question: how exactly does life thrive without sunlight?
To really wrap our heads around this, I want you to imagine you're descending into the deep ocean. You pass those first few hundred meters, and the sunlight just starts fading away. By the time you hit a kilometer down, you are plunged into a world of perpetual absolute darkness. We're talking about a totally alien environment right here on our own planet, one that literally hasn't seen a single ray of starlight in billions of years. So the massive question we have to ask ourselves as we sink into this abyss is, what if life doesn't actually need sunlight to thrive at all?
And that brings us to this mind-bending quote from the research, which really just shatters our standard view of the food chain. It says, if the sun went out tomorrow, an oasis of life wouldn't even notice the lights were gone. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. We are talking about an entire ecosystem so completely detached from the sun-driven world up here that a literal solar apocalypse wouldn't even register on their radar. Crazy, right?
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. The Impossible Abyss Lake. To figure out how life thrives without a star, we first need to understand the completely impossible environment it actually lives in.
Picture this. It's 2020. A research ship called the Ocean Explorer is crawling across the abyssal plain, miles and miles below the surface, when their headlights catch something that honestly shouldn't be physically possible. Out of the pitch black, they see this murky shape. It looks almost like a giant dark mirror laying perfectly flat on the seabed. And as they get closer, they realize they're looking at a lake. Yes, a lake, complete with its own shoreline and tiny waves, just sitting there at the very bottom of the ocean.
So how on earth do you get a lake inside an ocean? It sounds like a total glitch in the Matrix. Well, it all comes down to a 100-million-year-old geological process called salt tectonics. Here's how it works. First, ancient bodies of water evaporate, leaving behind these massive, incredibly thick layers of salt. Then, eventually, they reconnect to the sea, and those salt beds get buried deep under heavy layers of sediment. Over a ton of time, the immense crushing weight of the ocean above squashes that salt, cracking it and mixing it with the surrounding seawater. And finally, that creates an ultra-concentrated brine. Because this brine is just so incredibly dense and heavy, it doesn't mix with regular ocean water. It just pools into depressions on the seafloor, forming these massive underwater lakes.
To give you an idea of just how ridiculously extreme this environment actually is, that resulting brine is so thick, so heavy, and so dense that submersibles sent down by researchers can actually bounce off the surface of these lakes like a giant trampoline. Seriously, no way through it. It's just this unimaginably thick, heavy liquid pooling at the bottom of the world.
Which brings us to Section 2, Forging a Toxic Graveyard. Because, as you'll see, this geological marvel isn't just a quirky underwater puddle for submarines to bounce on. It is utterly deadly for almost all sea life.
Check out the stark contrast here. On the left, we've got the standard ocean. It's oxygen-rich, normal salinity, and it happily supports your standard marine life. But look over at the right, at the brine lake. It's anoxic, meaning absolutely zero oxygen. It's got extreme, crushing levels of salt, and to top it all off, it is heavily loaded with toxic methane gas just bubbling up from the earth. So yeah, this isn't just a fun little lake. It is essentially a hot tub of death sitting right in the middle of the ocean floor.
The reality down there is pretty gruesome. For most creatures, these lakes are a literal graveyard. Say a regular fish accidentally wanders out of the standard ocean and dips into that dense brine. It doesn't just swim back out. The extreme salt and that toxic methane cause immediate, violent convulsions. The poor thing goes into instant toxic shock the second it enters. But because there's no oxygen in the brine to help with natural decomposition, the remains are left in a state of perfect, eerie preservation.
Because of that strange lack of oxygen, scientists have actually found the shores of these underwater lakes absolutely littered with the mummified remains of eels and crabs, just perfectly preserved for decades, sitting there in the dark. It's a pretty haunting image. Just a perfectly still, completely toxic graveyard in the pitch black of the abyss.
All right, Section 3, Life Without a Star. Because here comes the massive plot twist of our journey today. Despite the utter, terrifying toxicity of this graveyard, right on the very edge of the lake, there is a thriving ecosystem
Welcome to what researchers literally call Muscle Beach. Scientists describe this spot as a carnival of life thriving right on the edge of that toxic soup. It is an incredible, almost unbelievable contrast to the mummified graveyard we just looked at. Down here, in the absolute dark, bordering a literal lake of death, life isn't just scraping by, it is absolutely booming with energy.
So who actually lives in this bizarre neighborhood? Well, first, you've got giant mussels clustering together in huge numbers, some of which are, remarkably, up to 100 years old. Then you have these massive tube worms with this bright green coloring that just pops vividly in the headlights of the submersibles. And finally, the hagfish, these slimy, ancient-looking creatures that just seem completely immune to the toxic shock that instantly kills regular fish. They're all just gathered around this toxic shoreline, totally thriving. But wait, how? How is this even possible without sunlight?
Section 4. The Secret of Chemosynthesis. This brings us right to the core focus of today's explainer. How exactly does life thrive without sunlight in the pitch dark?
The answer lies in this absolutely vital biological mechanism right here, chemosynthesis. We all know photosynthesis, right? That uses sunlight. Well, chemosynthesis is a process where organisms use chemical energy to produce their own food instead. This is the extraordinary secret that completely replaces the need for a sun in the deep sea.
Let's break down exactly how these mechanics work, because it's genuinely fascinating. First, toxic methane breath is released straight from the Earth's crust, bubbling right up into the brine pool. Then, instead of running away from it, these creatures have specialized bacteria living right inside their gills that actually absorb the methane. Finally, those bacteria act like tiny biological factories, converting that deadly toxic gas into the literal lifeblood of the entire ecosystem. They are essentially eating toxic methane to survive without a single photon of light.
Which brings us to this profound realization. Life doesn't actually need a star to survive. It just needs a chemical spark. I just absolutely love how this completely flips biology on its head. Those strict rules we learned in school? Yeah, they don't apply down here. Life finds a way, using the raw, toxic chemicals of the Earth itself as a complete substitute for a star. It's honestly a masterpiece of adaptation.
And that leads us to Section 5, searching for alien oceans, because we need to zoom out from our own planet for a minute to see how this builds into something much, much bigger. What does this discovery down in the abyss mean for the broader universe? Well, think about it. If life can thrive in a pitch-black, pressurized abyss like Muscle Beach, feeding off chemicals instead of sunlight, it completely rewrites the rules for astrobiology. It means we could potentially find life in the hidden, salty oceans of Jupiter's moon Europa or deep beneath the ice on Saturn's moon Enceladus. These are places incredibly far from the sun, places with zero sunlight, but with deep, chemical-rich oceans, just exactly like our abyss lakes here on Earth.
The really mind-bending implication here is that we might find we've been looking at the wrong stars for signs of life, when the real answer was hiding in the dark all along. For decades, we've been so incredibly focused on sunlight and the Goldilocks zone in our hunt for aliens that we completely forgot to look at the dark, pressurized, chemical-rich depths that we now know absolutely can sustain vibrant ecosystems.
Which leaves us with this final, thought-provoking question to close out our explainer today. Knowing what we know now about Muscle Beach, these wild, toxic brine lakes, and the sheer, raw power of chemosynthesis, did the very first life on Earth really start in a warm, sunlit little pond on the surface? Or did it start down here, deep in the dark, feeding off the chemical breath of the Earth itself? It completely reshapes our understanding of our own origins and leaves us with so much more to explore. Thanks for diving into this incredible deep-sea mystery with me. Keep questioning what you think you know.